The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between spam and grocery store promotions. Hazel Morrison almost deleted it, another piece of digital clutter in her already overwhelming inbox. But something about the subject line made her pause. Inquiry regarding estate sale items, Heritage Auction House. Her coffee grew cold as she read the message 3 times, each word feeling like a physical blow. The auction house was requesting documentation for several items that had been consigned under her mother-in-law's name: a vintage baseball card collection, a military medal set, and a handmade wooden toy chest. Items that Hazel recognized immediately because they had belonged to her son, Tyler, who had died in a car accident 18 months ago. Items that Patricia Whitman, her mother-in-law, had sworn were donated to charity.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hazel Morrison had always believed that grief was linear, that it followed some predictable path from denial to acceptance, like the stages everyone talked about. At 28, she thought she understood how loss worked. She'd lost her father when she was 16, watched her mother struggle through that dark period, seen how time eventually softened the sharp edges of pain. But losing Tyler had shattered every assumption she'd ever had about healing. The small ranch house in Millbrook, Colorado, still felt too big without her 6-year-old son's laughter echoing through its rooms. 18 months after the accident, Hazel found herself avoiding certain areas entirely. Tyler's bedroom, which remained exactly as he'd left it, the backyard where his soccer ball still sat in the corner of the shed, even the kitchen table where they'd shared countless breakfasts, Tyler chattering about his dreams while she tried to wake up enough to match his energy. Her husband Marcus had handled the loss differently. Where Hazel preserved everything, he seemed to determine to pack away reminders. Where she wanted to talk about Tyler constantly, Marcus grew quieter each month. The divide between them had grown so wide that Marcus now spent most nights at his mother's house across town, claiming he needed space to process his grief. Hazel suspected he simply couldn't bear to be around hers. Patricia Whitman had stepped into this void with the efficiency of someone accustomed to taking charge. Tyler's paternal grandmother had always been a force of nature, a retired real estate agent who approached problems with methodical determination and an unwavering belief in her own judgment. In the chaos following Tyler's funeral, Patricia had appointed herself the family's organizer, coordinator, and decision-maker. "You need to start healing, dear," Patricia would say during her frequent visits, her perfectly styled gray hair and pressed clothing a stark contrast to Hazel's increasingly disheveled appearance. Tyler wouldn't want you living in a shrine. But Hazel wasn't ready to let go. Every toy, every piece of clothing, every drawing taped to the refrigerator felt like a tether to her son. She'd catch herself buying his favorite cereal at the grocery store, setting aside money for soccer cleats he'd never wear, planning birthday parties that would never happen. The rational part of her mind knew this behavior wasn't healthy, but rational thought had become a luxury she couldn't afford. The tension between the two women had been building for months. Patricia believed in moving forward, in practical solutions, in the healing power of organization and clean surfaces. She'd arrive at the house with boxes and garbage bags, ready to tackle what she called the sorting. Hazel would find excuses to leave: sudden errands, doctor's appointments, long drives to nowhere, anything to avoid watching Tyler's belongings disappear into anonymous containers. "You can't keep everything, Hazel," Patricia had said during one particularly difficult afternoon in late spring. "These things are just collecting dust. Tyler's memory isn't in his baseball cards or his old toys. It's in here." She'd pointed to her chest, her voice gentle but firm. "There are children who could use these things.
Tyler would have wanted that. The logic was sound, even compassionate. Hazel had eventually agreed to let Patricia handle the donations, unable to face the task herself, but knowing it needed to be done. She'd watched boxes disappear from Tyler's room over several weeks, trusting that her mother-in-law was handling everything appropriately. Patricia had been thorough in her updates. This batch went to the children's shelter, these clothes went to the school district's family resource center, the books went to the public library. I kept receipts for everything, she had assured her, for tax purposes, you know. Tyler's things are helping other families now. Hazel had felt guilty for the relief that washed over her. The empty spaces in Tyler's room were painful, but they were also easier to breathe around. She could enter his bedroom without immediately breaking down. She could walk past his closet without expecting to see his school clothes hanging there. The house began to feel less like a museum and more like a home where healing might eventually be possible.
Marcus had seemed relieved, too. He'd started coming home more often, though their conversations remained carefully surface level. They'd developed an unspoken agreement to avoid discussing Tyler directly, instead focusing on mundane topics like work schedules and household maintenance. It wasn't intimacy, but it was stability of a sort. Hazel had thrown herself into work with renewed focus. Her job as a graphic designer for a local marketing firm had always been fulfilling, but now it became a refuge. She took on extra projects, volunteered for difficult clients, and stayed late most evenings. Her colleagues, who had been walking on eggshells around her for months, began to relax. The old Hazel, creative, reliable, capable, seemed to be returning. She'd even started making tentative plans for the future. Nothing dramatic, but small steps forward. She'd cleaned out her own closet for the first time in a year. She'd made dinner plans with her college roommate, Sarah, who lived 2 hours away in Denver. She'd started thinking about repainting Tyler's room, maybe turning it into a home office or craft space. The house in Millbrook had been Tyler's world, and, by extension, theirs. It was a starter home they'd bought 5 years earlier, planning to upgrade once Marcus's accounting practice grew and Hazel's freelance design work took off. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with young families and retirees who knew each other's names and borrowed tools across backyard fences. Tyler had ridden his bike on these sidewalks, played in the small park 3 blocks away, attended the elementary school visible from their front porch. Now the familiarity felt both comforting and suffocating. Every corner held memories, but they were good memories, and Hazel wasn't ready to abandon them entirely. She'd started imagining a future where she could live with Tyler's ghost in a healthy way, where his pictures could stay on the walls without making her cry, where she could remember his laugh without feeling like she was drowning. Patricia's efficiency had made this progress possible. By handling the practical aspects of Tyler's belongings, she'd freed Hazel to focus on emotional healing. It had been a gift, really, even if it hadn't felt like one at the time. Hazel had started feeling grateful for her mother-in-law's intervention, appreciative of the way Patricia had managed to clear space while preserving dignity. That gratitude made the email from Heritage Auction House feel like a physical assault. Hazel read the message again, her hands trembling as she held her phone. The auction house was following up on items that had been consigned months earlier. Tyler's vintage baseball card collection, which had been her father's before it became Tyler's treasured inheritance, his military medal set from his great-grandfather who'd served in Vietnam, and the wooden toy chest that Marcus had built with his own hands during Hazel's pregnancy. Items that Patricia had specifically told her went to the children's hospital. Items that were apparently being sold to the highest bidder. The email was professional, almost friendly. They were simply requesting additional documentation to complete their records. Nothing accusatory or suspicious, just a routine follow-up that had accidentally pulled back the curtain on what appeared to be a carefully constructed lie. Hazel set her coffee mug down with shaking hands, her mind racing through implications she wasn't ready to accept. There had to be an explanation, a mistake, a misunderstanding. But even as she tried to rationalize what she'd read, A cold certainty was settling in her chest. Patricia hadn't donated Tyler's belongings to help other children. She'd been selling them for profit.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Hazel stared at her phone screen until the words blurred together, hoping that somehow the email would rearrange itself into something that made sense. But no matter how many times she read it, the message remained unchanged. Heritage Auction House was asking about Tyler's belongings that Patricia had supposedly donated to charity. Her first instinct was to call Marcus, but she stopped with her finger hovering over his contact. What would she say? That she suspected his mother of lying about charity donations? That she thought Patricia had been selling Tyler's things for money? Without proof, it would sound like grief-driven paranoia, another sign that Hazel wasn't coping well. Instead, she found herself dialing the number at the bottom of the email. Heritage Auction House, this is Jennifer speaking. How can I help you? Hazel's throat felt tight. Hi, I received an email about some items that were consigned for auction. I think there might be a mistake. Of course. Can you give me the consignment number or the name on the account? It would be under Patricia Whitman. Saying the name out loud made everything feel more real, more terrible. She heard typing on the other end. Yes, I see the account. Patricia Whitman has been a client for about 8 months now. Very reliable consigner. What specific items were you calling about? 8 months. Tyler had died 18 months ago, which meant Patricia had been selling his belongings for nearly half the time since his death. While Hazel was struggling to enter his bedroom, while she was grateful for Patricia's help with donations, her mother-in-law had been turning her grandson's treasures into cash. The baseball card collection, the military medals, and a wooden toy chest, she managed. Oh yes, those were lovely pieces. The baseball cards did particularly well. We had several serious collectors bidding, and the military medals had such a beautiful presentation case. Are you looking to consign similar items? Each word felt like a slap. Those items, they sold? The baseball cards and medals sold about 3 months ago. The toy chest is actually coming up in next week's auction. It's a gorgeous piece, handcrafted, probably 2000s. The craftsmanship is exceptional. We expect it to do very well. Hazel's vision started to tunnel. The toy chest that Marcus had spent weeks building, sanding each corner smooth, painting Tyler's name in careful letters on the side, was sitting in some warehouse waiting to be sold to strangers. I need to go, she whispered, ending the call before Jennifer could respond. The house suddenly felt impossibly quiet. Hazel found herself walking to Tyler's room, something she'd been able to do more easily in recent weeks. But now the empty spaces Patricia had created looked different. They weren't signs of healing or generous donation. They were evidence of theft. She opened Tyler's closet and studied the gaps. His favorite jacket was gone, the one with the spaceship patches that he'd insisted on wearing even when it was too warm. His collection of vintage toy cars that had belonged to Marcus as a child, the framed photo of Tyler with his soccer team that had sat on his nightstand. How much had Patricia taken? How much had she sold? Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Mom made dinner. You should come over. The casual invitation felt surreal. Marcus wanted her to sit at Patricia's table, eat Patricia's food, and pretend everything was normal while Patricia's theft hung between them like a toxic cloud. She typed back, not feeling well, rain check. But as soon as she hit send, anger began replacing shock. Patricia had manipulated both of them. She'd used their grief as cover, positioned herself as the helpful family member taking care of difficult tasks. She'd made Hazel feel guilty for being attached to Tyler's belongings, then turned around and profited from them. The more she thought about it, the more violations she remembered. Patricia showing up unannounced to help organize. Patricia insisting that certain items would be better off with families who could use them. Patricia's oddly specific knowledge about donation tax benefits and receipts. Had any of Tyler's things actually gone to charity?
Hazel grabbed her laptop and searched for Heritage Auction House's website. They had an online catalog showing recent sales, complete with photos and sale prices. It took her 20 minutes of scrolling, but she found them. Tyler's baseball cards, listed as Vintage Sports Card Collection 1980s to 1990s, with a sale price of $1,847. The military medals were listed as Vietnam-era service medals with original documentation and had sold for $623. Nearly $2,500 for just 2 lots. Money that Patricia had pocketed while Hazel struggled with the guilt of letting Tyler's things go. But the toy chest was the breaking point. There it was in next week's auction preview. Custom handcrafted children's toy chest, excellent condition. The estimated value was $400 to $600, but Hazel knew it was priceless. Every evening after work, Marcus had disappeared into the garage with sandpaper and wood stain, emerging with sawdust in his hair and excitement in his eyes. He'd painted Tyler's name on the front in bright blue letters, Tyler's favorite color that year. Now it was lot number 247 in next week's sale. Hazel grabbed her keys and headed for the door, then stopped. She needed proof, real proof, not just her word against Patricia's. The auction house would have records, but they might not share them with someone who wasn't the consignor.
She thought about Marcus, probably sitting in his mother's kitchen right now, having no idea that his son's toy chest, the one he'd built with such love and care, was about to be sold to strangers. Patricia had stolen from both of them, but Marcus didn't know. Would he believe Hazel if she told him, or would he think this was another sign of her inability to move forward? Their relationship had become so fragile. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield, both of them afraid to say the wrong thing, to trigger the other's grief. They'd stopped talking about Tyler altogether, as if pretending he'd never existed was easier than acknowledging the hole he'd left behind. But this couldn't be ignored or talked around. This was theft, plain and simple. Hazel drove to Patricia's house in a state of controlled fury, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Patricia lived in one of Millbrook's newer subdivisions, in a sprawling house that had always seemed too big for one person. It was the kind of place that screamed success. Manicured lawn, expensive cars in the driveway, windows that sparkled like they were cleaned weekly. Marcus's truck was parked next to Patricia's silver Lexus. Through the large front window, Hazel could see them sitting at the dining room table, Patricia gesturing while she talked, Marcus nodding along. They looked comfortable, normal, like a mother and son sharing a pleasant evening meal. The sight made Hazel's anger spike higher. How could Patricia sit there, acting like the caring grandmother, while Tyler's belongings were being sold off piece by piece? She sat in her car for several minutes, trying to decide how to handle this. She could march in and confront Patricia directly, but that would put Marcus in an impossible position. She could call the police, but what crime had actually been committed? Patricia had been given permission to handle Tyler's belongings. The fact that she'd lied about where they went might be morally wrong, but was it illegal? Or she could go home, gather more evidence, and approach this methodically, build a case before making accusations. But the toy chest was selling next week. Once it was gone forever. Hazel turned off the engine and walked toward the front door. She had to know the truth, even if it destroyed what was left of their family. Tyler deserved better than being sold off piece by piece while his grandmother pocketed the profits. The doorbell echoed through the house, followed by the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal Patricia, her face lighting up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "Hazel, what a wonderful surprise! Marcus said you weren't feeling well." "I need to talk to you." "Of course, dear. Come in. Marcus, look who's here." As Hazel stepped into the foyer, she caught sight of Marcus rising from the dining room table, his face creased with concern. "Hey, you feeling better? You looked pretty rough this morning." Patricia was already bustling toward the kitchen. "I'll make you a plate. We're having that chicken recipe you used to love, the one with, 'I know about the auction house.'" The words cut through Patricia's chatter like a knife. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia stopped moving, her hand frozen on the kitchen doorframe. Marcus was confused, his gaze shifting between the two women.
"What auction house?" he asked. Patricia's face had gone very still, very controlled. It was an expression Hazel had never seen before. Calculating, careful. The mask of the caring grandmother had slipped just enough to reveal something much sharper underneath. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Patricia said slowly. "Have there?" Hazel pulled out her phone, showing the auction house webpage with Tyler's toy chest prominently displayed. Because Heritage Auction House seems to have a very clear understanding of who's been consigning Tyler's belongings. Marcus took the phone, his face changing as he read. "This is Tyler's toy chest, the one I made." His voice was barely above a whisper.
The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Marcus stared at his phone screen, his thumb scrolling through the auction listing with mechanical precision. His face had gone completely blank, the kind of expression Hazel recognized from the weeks immediately following Tyler's death, when emotion became too dangerous to display. Patricia broke first. "Before you two start jumping to conclusions, let me explain what actually happened here." "What actually happened," Hazel said, her voice dangerously quiet, "is that you've been lying to us for months. I've been protecting this family." Patricia's tone shifted into the authoritative register she used when discussing real estate deals or organizing church committees. "Do you have any idea what it's been like watching you two tear yourselves apart? Hazel, you couldn't even walk into Tyler's room without having a breakdown. Marcus, you were sleeping here half the time because you couldn't handle being in your own house." Marcus finally looked up from the phone. "So you decided to sell his things?" "I decided to help you both move forward instead of staying trapped in a shrine." Patricia moved into the living room, gesturing for them to follow. "Sit down, both of you, and let me tell you what's really been going on." Hazel remained standing. "I know what's been going on. You told us Tyler's belongings were going to children who needed them. You showed us donation receipts. Those receipts were real. I donated plenty of items. Clothes, books, toys that weren't particularly valuable. But some things," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "some things were worth more than sentimental value." The casual admission hit Hazel like a physical blow. Worth more than sentimental value? We're talking about Tyler's treasures, things that meant everything to him. Things that were sitting in boxes, doing no one any good. Patricia's voice grew sharper. That baseball card collection was deteriorating in Tyler's closet. Those military medals belonged in a collection where they'd be properly preserved. And Marcus, that toy chest was beautiful, but it was taking up space in a room neither of you could bear to enter. Marcus set the phone down with careful precision. "You sold the toy chest I made for my son. I consigned it. There's a difference." Patricia sat down heavily in her leather armchair, suddenly looking older than her 63 years. "Everything I did was temporary. If you'd wanted any of those items back, I could have withdrawn them from auction." Could have. Hazel caught the past tense immediately. "The baseball cards and medals have already sold, but the toy chest is being auctioned next week." Hazel felt her anger crystallizing into something harder, more focused. "You were going to let Marcus's handmade toy chest go to strangers without ever telling him." Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "I was hoping neither of you would have to know, that you could just move on." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked Patricia's perfectly manicured backyard. "You were hoping we wouldn't find out that you stole from us." "I didn't steal anything." Patricia's voice rose for the first time. "You gave me permission to handle Tyler's belongings. You were both too broken to make decisions, so I made them for you. We gave you permission to donate them to charity, not to sell them for profit." "Profit?" Patricia laughed bitterly. "Do you want to know what I've spent that money on? Tyler's medical bills that insurance didn't cover, the balance you still owed the funeral home, the grief counseling sessions that your insurance company refused to approve." The revelation stopped Hazel short.
She and Marcus had been struggling with the financial aftermath of Tyler's death for months. The medical helicopter transport, the ICU stay, the specialized equipment. Their insurance had covered most of it, but the remaining balance had been crushing. Hazel had taken on extra freelance projects just to keep up with the payment plans. "You paid Tyler's medical bills?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. $3,700 to the hospital, $1,500 to the funeral home, another $1,200 for 6 months of grief counseling sessions for both of you. Patricia pulled a folder from the side table, spreading papers across the coffee table. Every penny accounted for. Hazel stared at the papers. Bank statements, receipts, payment confirmations. The amounts matched perfectly with what she'd seen in the auction records. Patricia hadn't been pocketing the money. She'd been using it to clean up the financial wreckage of Tyler's death. But that somehow made it worse. "You had no right," Hazel whispered. "Those weren't just things to be liquidated. They were pieces of Tyler. They were pieces of Tyler that were buried in boxes while you two buried yourselves in debt and depression. I did what needed to be done, what neither of you was strong enough to do." Marcus turned from the window, his face twisted with an emotion Hazel couldn't read. "The grief counseling sessions I went to, the ones that helped me start functioning again, you paid for by selling Tyler's baseball cards. The baseball cards Tyler never looked at, that were sitting in plastic sleeves collecting dust," Patricia said firmly. "At least this way, they served a purpose." "Their purpose was to remind him of his grandfather," Hazel said. "Tyler used to get them out every Sunday morning and organize them by team, by year. He had plans to show them to his own kids someday." "Tyler is dead." The words came out harsh, brutal. Patricia immediately looked stricken, but she didn't take them back. "He's been dead for 18 months, and those cards weren't bringing him back. But paying for Marcus's counseling sessions? That helped someone who's still alive."
The truth of it was devastating. Hazel had watched Marcus slowly emerge from his darkest period over the past few months, had seen him start sleeping at home again, start talking about the future in tentative terms. The grief counseling had been a turning point for him, but their insurance company had denied the claims, calling it experimental treatment. They'd been making payments they couldn't afford because Marcus needed the help. Patricia had solved that problem by selling Tyler's treasures. "There had to be another way," Marcus said quietly. "What other way? You two were drowning, financially, emotionally, in every possible way. I watched my son and daughter-in-law disappearing into grief, and I had resources that could help." Patricia's voice softened. "Tyler loved you both. Don't you think he would have wanted his things to help you heal?" The question hit like a knife between the ribs. Hazel could almost hear Tyler's voice, practical and loving. "If it helps Daddy feel better, you should do it, Mama." But that didn't make Patricia's deception right. "You should have asked us," Hazel said. "You should have told us about the bills, about the counseling costs. We could have made the decision together." "Could you?" Patricia challenged. "Because every time I suggested sorting through Tyler's room, you found an excuse to leave the house. Every time Marcus tried to talk about practical matters, you shut down completely. When exactly was I supposed to have this conversation?" The accuracy stung because it was largely true. Hazel had been avoiding difficult decisions for months, letting Marcus handle the insurance battles and payment arrangements while she buried herself in work and denial. "So you decided for us," Marcus said. "I decided to help my family survive." Patricia's voice grew quiet, tired. "Maybe I should have found a different way to do it. Maybe I should have forced you to face these decisions earlier. But I couldn't watch you both self-destruct while Tyler's things sat unused and bills piled up unpaid." Hazel found herself caught between rage and gratitude, between violation and relief. The grief counseling had helped Marcus. It probably saved their marriage. The paid medical bills had lifted a crushing financial burden. But the cost had been Tyler's most precious possessions, sold without their knowledge or consent. "The toy chest," Marcus said suddenly. "It hasn't sold yet." Patricia nodded. "The auction is Tuesday. I can withdraw it tomorrow if you want." "What about the consignment fees, the listing costs?" "I'll handle those."
Hazel watched the exchange, feeling oddly distant from it. They were discussing logistics, practical arrangements, as if Patricia's betrayal could be solved with paperwork and phone calls. But the trust that had been broken felt irreparable. "I need to go home," she said. Marcus looked up. "Hazel," she needed to think about it. About all of it. She moved toward the door, then stopped. "The donation receipts you showed us for the clothes and toys that actually went to charity, those were real." Patricia nodded. "About 60% of Tyler's belongings went to various charities. The items I consigned were specifically chosen because they had significant monetary value that could help with your expenses." 60% to charity, 40% to auction. Patricia had been methodical, strategic. She identified the items that could generate the most money and quietly diverted them while maintaining the fiction of charitable donation. It was calculated kindness, and Hazel didn't know how to process that. "I'll call the auction house tomorrow about the toy chest," Marcus said. "But Hazel, we should talk about this, about what it means." What it meant was that their foundation was even more fractured than she had realized. Patricia had been managing their lives from behind the scenes, making decisions about their grief, their finances, their healing process. She had violated their trust, but she had also possibly saved them from drowning in debt and despair. The worst part was that it might have been the right thing to do. As Hazel drove home through Millbrook's quiet streets, she realized that everything she thought she knew about the past 18 months had been built on lies. Patricia hadn't just taken Tyler's belongings, she had taken their agency, their right to make their own mistakes and find their own way through grief. The question now was whether they could forgive her for saving them.
Hazel sat in her car outside her house for 20 minutes, staring at the dark windows and trying to decide if she had the strength to go inside. The conversation with Patricia had turned everything upside down, transforming a clear case of betrayal into something murky and complicated. She felt simultaneously violated and grateful, angry and relieved. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "We need to talk. Coming home." For the first time in months, the word home referred to their house, not Patricia's. That small shift felt significant, though Hazel wasn't sure if it was a good sign or just another complication. She finally went inside, moving through rooms that felt different now that she understood how they'd been preserved. The financial pressure that had been slowly crushing them, pressure she'd tried to ignore by working longer hours and avoiding bills, had been quietly lifted by selling Tyler's treasures. Their ability to keep the house, to afford grief counseling, to not declare bankruptcy, had been bought with pieces of their son's childhood. Marcus arrived 30 minutes later, looking exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. He sat down at their kitchen table, the same spot where Tyler used to eat breakfast while chattering about his dreams. "I called the auction house," he said without preamble. "The toy chest can be withdrawn, but there's a $200 cancellation fee plus the listing costs. Total of $350. Hazel poured herself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "Do you want it back?" "I don't know." Marcus rubbed his face. "A week ago, I thought it was helping some kid who needed toys. Now I found out it was going to collectors who might just stick it in storage, and that the money from Tyler's other things kept us from losing the house." The complexity was overwhelming. Hazel sat across from him, studying his face in the dim kitchen light. When did everything become so complicated? Probably the day our 6-year-old died and we had to figure out how to keep existing without him. Mom was right about one thing: we weren't handling any of this well. That doesn't give her the right to lie to us. No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't change the fact that her lies probably saved our marriage and our financial future. Hazel wanted to argue, but the truth was undeniable. The grief counseling had helped Marcus find his way back to functionality. The paid medical bills had lifted the crushing weight of debt that had been affecting every decision they made. Their relationship was still fragile, but it was a relationship. They were sitting at the same table, having a real conversation for the first time in months. I keep thinking about Tyler's baseball cards. How excited he got when he found one he didn't have. He'd run around the house showing everyone, even if it was just a common card from the grocery store packs. I remember. Marcus smiled slightly. He had that whole elaborate system for organizing them, by team first, then by year, then by position. And now they're in some collector's display case and Tyler's medical bills are paid. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in the moral maze Patricia had created. Finally, Marcus spoke. I think we need to understand the full scope of what she did. Not just the big items, but everything. What actually went to charity, what got sold, where the money went. Hazel nodded. And we need to decide what happens next. With her, with us, with the toy chest. The toy chest first. It's the only thing we can still control. Marcus pulled out his phone. If we don't decide by tomorrow, it goes to auction Tuesday. $350 to get back something you made with your own hands? Or we let it go and accept that it helped pay for my therapy sessions, which probably saved our marriage. The brutal calculus of grief. Hazel had never realized how many impossible choices loss would create, how every decision would carry the weight of Tyler's absence. There's something else we need to consider, she said slowly. What happens with Patricia now? Do we forgive her? Cut her off? Pretend this never happened? Marcus was quiet for a long time. She's Tyler's grandmother, and she's my mother. But what she did? She violated our trust completely, but she struggled to find the words. She saw us drowning and threw us a life preserver made from Tyler's things, without asking if we wanted to be saved that way. Would we have said yes if she'd asked? That was the question that made everything harder. If Patricia had approached them 8 months ago and said, Tyler's baseball cards could pay for Marcus's grief counseling, would they have agreed? If she'd said, these military medals could cover the remaining medical bills, would they have found the strength to make that choice? Probably not. Hazel was too protective of Tyler's belongings, too wrapped up in preserving every piece of him. Marcus was too deep in his depression to engage with practical decisions. They'd been paralyzed by grief while bills piled up and their marriage slowly disintegrated.
I need to see the records, Hazel said suddenly. All of them. Every item, every transaction, every payment. If we're going to figure out how to move forward, I need to understand exactly what happened. Marcus looked surprised. You want to dig deeper into this? I want the truth. All of it. Patricia said she kept detailed records, so let's see them. Hazel felt something shifting inside her, a determination she hadn't experienced in months. If she's been managing our lives from behind the scenes, I want to know exactly how and why. That might be painful, seeing Tyler's things listed like inventory items. Everything about this is painful, but not knowing is worse. Marcus studied her face. You're different tonight. More present. Hazel considered that. I think I've been hiding from difficult truths for so long that facing one head-on feels almost refreshing, even if it's terrible. So what's the plan? Tomorrow, we go to Patricia's house and ask to see everything. The auction records, the donation receipts, the payment confirmations, all of it. Hazel felt her resolve strengthening, and we make decisions about our future based on complete information instead of partial truths and assumptions. What about the toy chest? Hazel looked around the kitchen, imagining Tyler's voice echoing through the house. He'd loved that toy chest, had spent hours arranging and rearranging his treasures inside it. But he'd also loved his parents, had hated seeing them sad or worried. We'll decide about the toy chest after we see the full picture, she said. But Marcus, whatever we decide together. No more letting other people manage our grief for us. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, the first intentional physical contact they'd shared in weeks. I'm scared that if we pull this thread, everything will unravel. Everything already has unraveled. We're just finally looking at the pieces. They spent the next hour making plans, creating a list of questions they wanted answered, discussing how to approach Patricia without letting the conversation devolve into accusations and defensiveness. It felt strange to be working together on something, to be united in purpose, even if that purpose was investigating a family betrayal. Around midnight, as they were getting ready for bed, Marcus paused at Tyler's bedroom door. Do you think he would understand what Mom did? Hazel joined him in the doorway, looking at the half-empty room that had once been filled with a little boy's treasures. He'd loved that toy chest, had spent hours arranging and rearranging his treasures inside it, But he'd also loved his parents, had hated seeing them sad or worried. I think Tyler would want us to be okay, but I also think he deserved to have us make our own choices about his things. Even if our choices would have been wrong, even then, because they would have been our mistakes to make. Marcus nodded slowly. I love my mother, but I'm angry with her in a way I don't know how to process. We'll figure it out, together. That night, for the first time since Tyler's death, they slept in the same bed. Not out of passion or even comfort, but out of a shared determination to face whatever came next as partners, rather than isolated individuals managing separate griefs. Hazel lay awake for hours, listening to Marcus breathe beside her and thinking about the strange mathematics of loss. Patricia had traded Tyler's physical belongings for their financial stability and emotional healing. It was a transaction that made practical sense, but violated something fundamental about the nature of grief and memory. But it had also possibly saved their marriage and their future. Tomorrow, they would demand answers. They would insist on transparency and honesty. They would reclaim their right to make their own decisions about Tyler's legacy and their own healing. Tonight, though, they were just two broken people who had finally found each other again in the wreckage of their loss, preparing to fight for their right to make their own mistakes and find their own way forward. The toy chest could wait until Tuesday. Their marriage couldn't wait any longer. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Hazel made a decision that surprised her. Regardless of what they discovered about Patricia's actions, she was grateful. Not for the deception, but for the outcome. Tyler's belongings had done one final service for their family. They had helped his parents find their way back to each other. Now they just had to figure out if that was worth the cost. Patricia opened her front door the next morning wearing an apron covered in flour, her usually perfect appearance softened by the domesticity of Saturday morning baking. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen, and for a moment Hazel was transported back to better times when Patricia's house represented comfort and family gatherings rather than secrets and betrayal. "I wasn't expecting you so early," Patricia said, but she stepped aside to let them in. "I was making Tyler's favorite rolls. Force of habit, I suppose." The mention of Tyler's favorite anything should have been painful, but instead it felt like Patricia was offering an olive branch. Hazel noticed that Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly at the familiar smell. "We came to see the records," Hazel said, keeping her voice neutral. "All of them. You said everything was documented." Patricia nodded, untying her apron. "Of course. I've been expecting this conversation since last night. Coffee first, or straight to business?" "Business," Marcus said, but not unkindly. Patricia led them to her home office, a meticulously organized space that doubled as a command center for her various volunteer activities. She pulled out 2 thick file folders and spread them across the large desk. "Everything is here. Auction consignments, donation receipts, payment confirmations, bank statements showing where the money went." Patricia's voice was steady, professional. "I know you're angry with me, and I understand why. But I want you to see that every decision was made with your best interests in mind." Hazel opened the first folder and immediately felt overwhelmed. Patricia hadn't just kept records, she had created a comprehensive inventory system. Each item was photographed, cataloged, and tracked through its final destination. Tyler's clothes organized by size and season, with photos showing their condition and documentation of which charity received what. Books sorted by reading level with notes about which schools and libraries had received donations. "You photographed everything?" Marcus said, sounding amazed despite himself. "I knew you might want to see someday, and I wanted proof for tax purposes." Patricia pulled out a separate binder. "Here are the items that went to auction, with detailed explanations for why I chose to consign them instead of donate them." The auction items were documented with the same meticulous care. Tyler's baseball card collection was photographed card by card with notes about condition and estimated value. The military medals included documentation of their historical significance and provenance. Even items Hazel hadn't known were valuable were carefully researched and explained. "Tyler's model airplane collection?" Hazel looked up from a detailed valuation report. "I thought those went to the children's hospital."
The common plastic models did, but 3 of them were vintage collectibles from the 1970s. They belonged to your father first, then Tyler. Patricia pointed to a photograph showing 3 pristine model planes in their original boxes. They sold for $340 and paid for 2 of your grief counseling sessions. The revelation was typical of what they were discovering. Patricia had been surgical in her selections, identifying items with monetary value while preserving sentimental favorites. Tyler's stuffed animals had gone to the children's hospital, as promised. His books had gone to the school library. His clothes had clothed families in need. But the valuable collectibles, the antiques, the items that could generate significant money, those had been quietly diverted to auction. The teddy bear from his first birthday? Hazel said, flipping through donation receipts. That went to charity? To the pediatric ward at Denver Children's Hospital specifically, along with 37 other stuffed animals. The charge nurse said Tyler's bear became a favorite with the kids waiting for surgery. Despite her anger, Hazel felt a warm flutter in her chest. The idea of Tyler's beloved teddy bear comforting other children felt right in a way that selling it never could have. Marcus was studying the financial records, tracing money from auction sales to bill payments. You paid Dr. Rodriguez directly for my counseling sessions? Your insurance company kept denying the claims, calling it experimental treatment, but you were finally starting to sleep through the night, finally talking about going back to work. I wasn't going to let bureaucracy derail your progress. Patricia's voice softened. The baseball cards paid for 6 sessions. Tyler's model airplanes paid for 2 more. And the military medals? Emergency room bills from the night of the accident. The insurance covered most of it, but there was still $623 in balance billing that kept going to collections. Each revelation peeled back another layer of the financial crisis Hazel had been trying to ignore. She'd known they were struggling, but seeing the actual numbers laid out was sobering. Without Patricia's intervention, they would have been declaring bankruptcy by Christmas. There's something else, Patricia said, opening a 3rd folder. I need to show you what I didn't sell. This folder contained photographs of items Patricia had preserved, things she'd removed from Tyler's room but hadn't donated or consigned. Tyler's first soccer trophy sat wrapped in tissue paper in a storage box. His kindergarten graduation cap and gown were carefully preserved in acid-free containers. A shoebox full of his artwork, organized chronologically with dates written in Patricia's careful handwriting.
I couldn't bear to get rid of these, Patricia admitted. They're in my spare bedroom closet, waiting for when you're ready to see them again. Hazel stared at a photo of Tyler's Father's Day card from last year, the one with his handprint painted to look like a flower. She'd thought it was lost forever, donated with everything else. You kept his artwork? Every piece I could find. Report cards, school photos, the plaster handprint from preschool. Things that were uniquely his, that couldn't be replaced or replicated. Patricia's voice grew thick with emotion. I may have sold his collectibles, but I would never sell his memories. The distinction was important, even revelatory. Patricia had been strategic rather than sentimental, but she hadn't been heartless. She'd preserved the irreplaceable while liquidating the valuable. Marcus found the toy chest documentation. You were really going to sell it without telling me? Patricia looked genuinely pained. I kept hoping you'd want to come get things from Tyler's room. I thought if you saw the empty spaces, you might ask about specific items, and I could explain then. But you both avoided going in there completely. Because it hurt too much. I know, and that's exactly why these things needed to serve a purpose instead of gathering dust. Patricia pulled out a letter from Heritage Auction House. The toy chest was going to be featured in their handcrafted treasures section. It would have gone to someone who appreciated the craftsmanship. It was never about the craftsmanship, Marcus said quietly. It was about the love I put into making it for my son. Love that helped you heal when the money from other sales paid for therapy. Love that kept you from losing your house when the medical bills were paid. Tyler's things didn't stop serving your family. They just served in a different way. The logic was sound, but it didn't address the violation of trust. Hazel could see that Patricia genuinely believed she'd done the right thing, had made the hard choices that Hazel and Marcus couldn't make themselves.
But good intentions didn't erase the months of deception. "I need to see Tyler's preserved things," Hazel said suddenly. "The artwork, the trophies, everything you kept." Patricia looked surprised, but nodded. "Of course, they're upstairs." The spare bedroom had been transformed into a careful archive of Tyler's most precious memories. Storage boxes were labeled and dated, with inventory lists taped to each lid. Patricia had created a museum of their son's life, organized with the same meticulous care she'd applied to the donations and sales. Hazel opened the first box and found Tyler's collection of special rocks, ordinary stones he'd gathered from playgrounds and hiking trails, each one wrapped individually and stored with notes about where he'd found them. In any other context, they would have been thrown away as childhood clutter. Here, they were preserved like artifacts. "I couldn't donate these," Patricia said softly. "They were important to him, even if no one else would understand why." Marcus found Tyler's soccer medal from last spring, the last one he'd earned before the accident. "I thought this was lost." It was in his backpack, along with his favorite pencil and a drawing of the three of you. He drew this the day before the accident. The drawing was Tyler at his most hopeful. Bright colors, smiling faces, a sun with exaggerated rays stretching across the entire sky. Hazel had to sit down, overwhelmed by the sudden intensity of grief mixed with gratitude. Tyler had saved Tyler's joy. "Why didn't you show us these before?" Hazel asked. "Because you weren't ready. You could barely handle losing the valuable items. Seeing his most personal treasures would have destroyed you both." Patricia sat beside Hazel on the spare bed. "I was waiting for signs that you were healing, that you could appreciate these memories without being consumed by them." "And selling his collectibles was supposed to help us heal? Paying your bills was supposed to help you heal. Funding Marcus's therapy was supposed to help you heal. Keeping you from bankruptcy was supposed to help you heal. Tyler's things didn't stop serving your family. They just served in a different way." The logic was sound, but it didn't address the violation of trust. Hazel could see that Patricia genuinely believed she'd done the right thing, had made the hard choices that Hazel and Marcus couldn't make themselves. But good intentions didn't erase the months of deception. As they prepared to leave, Patricia made one final offer. "The toy chest auction is Monday morning. If you want it back, I'll withdraw it tonight and cover all the fees. No questions asked, no guilt trips. It's your choice." Hazel looked at Marcus, seeing her own conflicted feelings reflected in his face. The toy chest represented so many things: Tyler's childhood, Marcus's love, their family's happier times. But it also represented $400 to $600 that could help other families dealing with similar tragedies. "We'll decide tomorrow," Marcus said, "together." As they drove home, Hazel realized something had shifted during the afternoon. The anger was still there, but it was complicated now with understanding and even admiration. Patricia had orchestrated their survival while they were too broken to save themselves. The question was whether they could forgive her for doing it without their permission, and whether they were strong enough now to make their own choices about Tyler's legacy.
Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Hazel was making coffee when she saw a sleek black sedan pull into their driveway. A woman in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a leather briefcase and walking with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. Marcus answered the door, and Hazel heard formal introductions being made. "I'm attorney Jennifer Walsh from Morrison and Associates. I represent Heritage Auction House. May I come in?" Hazel's stomach dropped. She joined Marcus at the door, noting the lawyer's perfectly composed expression and the way she held her briefcase like a weapon. "What can we do for you, Ms. Walsh?" Hazel asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "I understand there's been some confusion about items consigned for auction under Patricia Whitman's name, items that may belong to your family." The lawyer's voice was crisp, professional, and somehow threatening despite its neutral tone. They sat in the living room, the lawyer perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to spring into action.
Marcus and Hazel took the chairs across from her, unconsciously presenting a united front. Mrs. Whitman contacted us yesterday evening about withdrawing lot number 247, the handcrafted toy chest, Ms. Walsh continued. However, after reviewing our records, we've discovered some concerning discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Marcus asked. Ms. Walsh opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Our authentication department has been researching the provenance of several items Mrs. Whitman has consigned over the past 8 months. The baseball card collection in particular has raised some red flags. Hazel felt the room temperature drop. What do you mean? The collection included several cards that are currently listed on the National Stolen Property Database, cards that were reported missing from an estate sale in Boulder 2 years ago. The lawyer handed them a printout showing photographs of baseball cards that Hazel recognized immediately as Tyler's. That's impossible, Marcus said. Those cards belong to my son. Before that, they belonged to my father-in-law. Do you have documentation proving ownership? Original purchase receipts? Insurance appraisals? Estate transfer documents? The question hung in the air like smoke. Hazel tried to remember if her father had ever given them formal documentation when he'd passed the collection to Tyler. It had been a grandfather's gift to his grandson, a casual transfer of beloved items from one generation to the next. They were a gift, Hazel said weakly, from my father to Tyler. Unfortunately, without proper documentation, we have to assume these items may have been stolen goods. The auction house is required to cooperate with law enforcement in such matters. Ms. Walsh pulled out another document. Boulder County Sheriff's Office has opened an investigation into the sale of these cards. The words hit like physical blows. Investigation? Mrs. Whitman is currently being questioned about how she acquired stolen property, and I'm afraid that extends to all items she's consigned with us over the past year. Hazel's mind raced. But we have photos of Tyler with those cards. Birthday pictures, Christmas morning, him organizing them on the floor. Those photos would be helpful evidence, Miss Walsh conceded, but they don't prove legal ownership. The original owner in Boulder claims his collection was worth over $15,000 and included several rare cards that match your son's collection exactly. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. So you're saying my mother-in-law is being accused of selling stolen goods? I'm saying she's being questioned about the provenance of items she claimed to own, items that generated significant proceeds at auction. The lawyer's tone remained professionally neutral. If she can't prove legal ownership, she may be facing charges of receiving stolen property and fraud. The implications crashed over Hazel like a wave. Patricia could go to jail. The money that had paid our bills might have to be returned. Worst yet, if the baseball cards were really stolen, what did that say about my father's acquisition of them? My father bought those cards legally, Hazel said, but even as she said it, doubt crept in. Her father had been a collector, always hunting for deals at estate sales and flea markets. He'd been proud of his ability to spot valuable items that others overlooked. Your father's acquisition methods are part of the investigation, Ms. Walsh confirmed. If he purchased stolen goods, even unknowingly, that doesn't transfer legal ownership to your family. Marcus turned from the window, his face pale. What happens to the money my mother used to pay our bills? If the court determines the items were stolen, all proceeds from their sale will need to be returned to the original owner. Additionally, Heritage Auction House will likely pursue recovery of their commission and fees. The number formed in Hazel's mind before she could stop it from forming. Over $6,000 in auction proceeds, plus commissions and fees. Money they didn't have. Money that had already been spent on medical bills, funeral costs, and therapy sessions. We'd have to pay back money we never received. Money that kept us from bankruptcy. That's a matter for the courts to determine, but yes, that's a possibility. Ms. Walsh gathered her papers with efficient movements. I'd recommend you contact your own attorney as soon as possible and gather any documentation you have about your family's ownership of these items. Photos, insurance records, anything that might help establish legitimate ownership. After the lawyer left,
Hazel and Marcus sat in stunned silence. The progress they've made in understanding Patricia's actions, the tentative forgiveness they'd been building, the sense that they were finally moving forward, all of it crumbled in the face of potential criminal charges. "We need to call Mom," Marcus said finally. Patricia answered on the first ring, her voice tight with stress. "Have the police been to see you yet?"
No, but the auction house lawyer just left. Patricia, what the hell is going on? I'm at the sheriff's office. They're saying some of Tyler's baseball cards were stolen from an estate sale in Boulder. But that's impossible. Your father-in-law gave those cards to Tyler years ago. Hazel grabbed the phone. My father wouldn't have bought stolen cards. I know that, dear, but apparently the original owner claims his entire collection was taken from his house during an estate sale, and several of the cards match what Tyler had. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. They're treating me like a criminal. Did you call a lawyer? I can't afford a lawyer. The money from the auctions is gone. It went to your bills, remember? And now they're saying I might have to pay it all back, plus penalties. The cruel irony was overwhelming. Patricia had sold Tyler's belongings to save their family financially, and now that same action might destroy them all economically and legally. We're coming down there. No, don't. This will only get worse if they think you were involved in receiving stolen property. Patricia's voice grew stronger, more determined. I need you two to stay clear of this until we know more. But staying clear felt impossible. After they hung up, Hazel found herself digging through boxes in their basement, searching for any documentation that might prove her father's legitimate ownership of the baseball cards. Birth certificates, old insurance policies, random receipts from decades past, anything that might establish a legal trail. Here, Marcus said, pulling out a photo album. Tyler's 6th birthday party. Look. The photo showed Tyler surrounded by family, holding up individual baseball cards for the camera. In the background, Hazel's father could be seen beaming with pride as Tyler exclaimed over each new discovery. This proves the cards were in our family, but it doesn't prove Dad bought them legally. Marcus flipped through more photos, stopping at one from 2 Christmases ago. Wait, look at this one. The photo showed Tyler's entire collection spread out on the living room floor, organized in his meticulous system. But in the corner of the image, partially visible, was a receipt book that Hazel's father had been using to catalog his purchases. Dad kept records of everything he bought, Hazel said, suddenly remembering. He had this obsession with documenting provenance for insurance purposes. They spent the next 3 hours searching through her father's papers, which had been stored in their basement since his death. Finally, in a manila folder labeled Collectibles 2018 to 2020, they found what they were looking for, a detailed purchase log with dates, locations, and amounts paid for various items. The baseball cards were listed there, purchased from Henderson Estate Sale, Boulder, with a date that was 6 months before the Boulder collection was reported stolen. Dad bought them legally, Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. He bought them before they were reported stolen, which means either someone made a mistake or the person claiming they're stolen is lying, Hazel finished. They photographed the records and called the sheriff's office, but were told Patricia had already been released pending further investigation. When they finally reached her at home that evening, she sounded exhausted and defeated. Even if we can prove Dad bought the cards legally, the damage is done, Patricia said. Heritage Auction House has frozen my account pending the investigation. I can't access any of the money, and they're talking about blacklisting me from future consignments. But if Dad's records prove legitimate ownership, it might clear the criminal charges, but it won't undo the mess I've created for this family. Patricia's voice was heavy with regret. I tried to solve your problems quietly, and instead I've created much bigger ones. The weight of the situation settled over them like a shroud. Even if they could prove the cards weren't stolen, the investigation would take months. Legal fees would mount. Their privacy would be invaded as investigators dug through every aspect of their financial recovery. Worse yet, the stress was already taking its toll. Marcus had missed 2 days of work dealing with lawyers and police interviews. Hazel found herself unable to focus on anything, her mind constantly racing through worst-case scenarios. That night, as they lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Marcus voiced what they were both thinking. Maybe we should have just stayed broken. At least bankruptcy was predictable.
Hazel didn't answer, but she found herself wondering if Patricia's intervention had really saved them, or if it had just postponed their destruction while making it infinitely more complicated. The toy chest auction was scheduled for the next morning, but now it felt like the least of their problems. They were facing potential criminal charges, financial ruin, and the possibility that everything Patricia had done to help them had been built on stolen goods and legal quicksand. Tyler's belongings hadn't saved their family after all. They might have destroyed it.
The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Tyler himself. 3 weeks after the investigation began, while Hazel was digitizing family photos to provide evidence of the baseball card's legitimate ownership, she discovered something that changed everything. In a video from Tyler's 5th birthday party, her father could be heard clearly explaining the card's history to Patricia, who had been filming the celebration. "These cards have quite a story," her father's voice said from beyond the grave. "I bought them from Bill Henderson's estate sale after he passed. Poor guy had been collecting for 40 years, but his son just wanted them gone. Bill would have been heartbroken to know his collection was being sold for pennies on the dollar." The name stopped Hazel cold. Bill Henderson. The same name listed in her father's purchase records. She called Detective Morrison at the Boulder County Sheriff's Office immediately. "Detective, I need to ask you something about the stolen card collection. What was the original owner's name?" "Robert Chen. He claims the cards were taken from his home during a family gathering in 2021. Not Bill Henderson?" There was a pause. "No. Who's Bill Henderson?" "The person my father bought the cards from in 2019, according to his records and our family video." Within hours, the investigation shifted completely. Robert Chen, it turned out, had purchased several baseball cards from Bill Henderson's estate sale in 2020, a year after Hazel's father had bought Tyler's collection from the same estate. When Chen's cards were stolen in 2021, he had provided police with photographs of his collection to file the theft report. But Chen's photos showed cards that looked identical to Tyler's cards because they had come from the same original collection. The real thief had stolen Chen's cards, not Tyler's. The collections were similar because they had both originated from Bill Henderson's decades of collecting, sold off in multiple batches after his death. Detective Morrison called personally to deliver the news. "We've located Mr. Chen's actual stolen cards. They were found in a pawn shop in Denver last week. Your family's collection is completely cleared." The relief was overwhelming, but it was quickly followed by anger. So my mother-in-law was arrested and humiliated for nothing? Mr. Chen made an honest mistake in identifying the cards. But yes, Mrs. Whitman was never in possession of stolen property. When they broke the news to Patricia, she cried for the first time since Tyler's death. Not tears of sadness, but of pure relief mixed with exhaustion. The past 3 weeks had aged her visibly, the stress of potential criminal charges etching new lines around her eyes. I kept thinking about Tyler watching from somewhere, seeing his grandmother accused of being a thief, the irony of trying to honor his memory by helping his parents, only to be charged with profiting from stolen goods. But the legal vindication opened the door for a different kind of reckoning. With the crisis past, they finally had space to address the underlying issues that had brought them to this point. "The charges are dropped, but that doesn't change what you did," Hazel said quietly. "You still lied to us for months. You still sold Tyler's belongings without our permission." Patricia nodded, her composure finally cracking completely. "I know, and I need to tell you something I should have said weeks ago." She took a shaky breath. "I wasn't just trying to help you two. I was trying to help myself." Marcus looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "After Tyler died, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept thinking about all the ways I'd failed as a grandmother, missed soccer games because of work, postponed visits because I was busy. All those times I chose my schedule over spending time with him." Patricia's voice grew thick with grief. "I couldn't bring him back, but I could make sure his things served a purpose, that his belongings helped his parents instead of just existing. So you took control because it made you feel better?"
I took control because watching you two destroy yourselves was killing me too, and I didn't know any other way to help. Patricia met Hazel's eyes. But you're right. I should have asked. I should have trusted you to make your own decisions, even if they were different from what I thought was best. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Not quite forgiveness, but acknowledgement of the complex motivations that had driven Patricia's actions. Marcus spoke first. The toy chest motor sold. It's been sitting in the auction house warehouse all this time, waiting for us to decide. What do you want to do with it? Patricia asked. I want to see it first. I haven't actually seen it since the day I finished building it. Tyler kept it in his room, and after the accident, I couldn't. They drove to Heritage Auction House together, the first time all three of them had been in the same car since Tyler's funeral. The warehouse was vast and echoing, filled with items waiting for their next owners. When they found the toy chest, sitting under bright fluorescent lights with a lot number taped to its side, Marcus stopped walking. It's smaller than I remembered, he said softly. The chest was beautiful, clearly handcrafted with loving attention to detail. Tyler's name was painted on the front in bright blue letters, slightly faded now, but still legible. The wood gleamed with the careful sanding and staining Marcus had applied 2 years earlier. He used to sit on it when he couldn't sleep. Said it made him feel like he was sitting on all his favorite things. Marcus ran his hand over the smooth surface. I was so proud when I finished it. Thought it would last forever. Hold his treasures until he had kids of his own. It still could. If you want it back, Patricia said quietly. Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying the chest from different angles. Finally, he turned to Hazel. What do you think Tyler would want us to do? Hazel considered the question seriously. I think Tyler would want it to help someone, but I think he'd also want us to choose how.
Meaning? We withdraw it from auction, but we don't bring it home. We find a family who needs it, really needs it, and we give it to them directly, with Tyler's story, so they know it comes with love. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. A family with a little boy who needs a treasure chest. Or a little girl, Patricia added. Tyler never discriminated in his friendships. They spoke with Jennifer at the auction house, who helped them connect with the local family resource center. Within a week, they had found the perfect recipients, the Rodriguez family, whose 4-year-old son Danny was undergoing treatment for leukemia. Danny's toys and comfort items traveled with him between home, hospital, and various family members' houses. A treasure chest would give him a sense of ownership and stability no matter where he was staying. The day they delivered the toy chest, Danny's face lit up with the same excitement Tyler used to show. His mother, Rosa, cried when they told her about Tyler and the love that had gone into building the chest. We'll take good care of it, Rosa promised, and when Danny's better, we'll teach him to take care of other children the way Tyler is taking care of him now. As they drove home from the Rodriguez house, Hazel realized something had fundamentally shifted. The past month of crisis had forced them to work as a team in ways they hadn't since before Tyler's death. Marcus was sleeping at home again, not because the house was less painful, but because facing the pain together was easier than facing it alone. I want to see Tyler's artwork, Hazel said suddenly. All the pieces you saved, Patricia. I think I'm ready now. They spent that evening going through the carefully preserved boxes in Patricia's spare room. Tyler's drawings, his school projects, his collection of important rocks. Each item was a window into his 6-year-old mind. But instead of drowning in grief, Hazel found herself smiling at his creativity, his enthusiasm, his absolute certainty that the world was full of wonders worth collecting. Look at this one, Marcus said, holding up a drawing of their family as superheroes. I'm Super Dad, and my power is making pancakes really fast. And I'm Mama Hero with the power of hugging away sadness, Hazel added, reading Tyler's careful lettering. What's Patricia's power? Marcus asked, squinting at the small print. Patricia looked at the drawing over his shoulder. Grandma Magic, fixing everything that's broken. The description was so accurate, it took their breath away. Patricia had been trying to fix everything that was broken, just as Tyler had imagined she could.
Her methods had been flawed, her execution secretive and hurtful, but her motivation had been exactly what Tyler had seen in her, the desire to repair what was damaged. 6 months later, they established the Tyler Morrison Foundation, funded partially by proceeds from Patricia's legitimate sale of her own collectibles. The foundation provides treasure chests, some handmade, some donated, to children in hospitals and crisis situations. Each chest comes with a card telling Tyler's story and the importance of keeping treasures safe. Marcus builds the wooden chests in their garage, the same space where he'd crafted Tyler's original. Patricia coordinates with hospitals and family service centers, using her organizational skills for the foundation's operations. Hazel designs the marketing materials and manages the social media presence that has attracted donors from across the country. They're not the same family they were before Tyler's death. That family died with him. But they're a new family, built from the pieces of the old one, held together by shared purpose instead of shared loss. Patricia still lives across town, but she comes for dinner every Sunday. They talk about Tyler openly now, sharing memories and stories without the fear that mentioning him will break someone. The grief hasn't disappeared, but it has transformed from something that isolated them into something that connects them to other families facing similar losses. The house in Millbrook still holds Tyler's presence, but it's a living presence now, rather than a shrine. His room has become the foundation's workshop, where volunteers assemble care packages and Marcus builds treasure chests. Tyler's memory serves a purpose, just as Patricia had always believed it should. And sometimes, when the afternoon light slants through the workshop windows just right, Hazel swears she can hear the echo of a little boy's laughter, delighted that his treasures are still helping people, still spreading joy, still serving love long after he's gone.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.